At 100 feet, even a small bomb can become a boomerang made of steel. Drop it, and your aircraft may still be directly above the target when the casing bursts into fragments. Fly a little lower, and the weapon may strike before its fuse has even become safe to function. In the Pacific War, American crews attacked airfields so low that palm trees filled the windshield. Beneath them were bombs officially placed in the 23-pound class, each wearing a small parachute. The parachute was not there to save the bomb. It was there to stop the pilot from being killed by his own weapon. Crews called them parafrags. The Army called them the AN-M40. That answer sounds simple. The chute slowed the bomb while the aircraft flew away. But it is only half the story. The parachute performed 3 connected jobs. It created separation. It helped hold the weapon in the attitude its designers wanted. And its opening began the sequence that armed the fuse. Most importantly, it helped turn 2 different actions, strafing and bombing, into one continuous attack. To see why that mattered, we have to follow one bomb from the rack to the ground, then test the complete system against the Japanese airfields at Wewak. The result will also correct a popular exaggeration. Wewak was a devastating Allied victory, but it was not one magical bomb, one formation, or 15 minutes of effortless destruction. Fragmentation bombs were not designed to excavate concrete or collapse a factory. Their targets were softer and more exposed. Personnel, trucks, lightly protected equipment, and aircraft on the ground. Against those targets, a large blast was less important than a dense pattern of fast steel fragments. The problem was delivery. High and medium altitude bombing remained part of 5th Air Force operations. Heavy bombers could hit runways, fuel stores, buildings, and area targets. But small aircraft dispersed around a jungle airfield were difficult targets, especially through tropical cloud and violent weather. Coming lower improved the crew's view of the target. It also allowed attack aircraft to fire forward-facing machine guns during the approach. Those guns could damage parked aircraft and force anti-aircraft crews to seek cover. Then physics imposed a limit. At more than 200 miles per hour, an aircraft covered roughly 300 feet every second. A bomb released at treetop height reached the ground in only a few seconds. Without some form of retardation or delayed action, the aircraft could still be inside the danger area when the weapon burst. For large bombs used against ships, 5th Air Force crews often used delays of 4 or 5 seconds. The bomb could skip across the water, strike or penetrate a hull, and explode after the aircraft had passed. But an airfield fragmentation bomb had a different job. It needed to burst at the surface, among wings, fuel tanks, tires, engines, vehicles, and people in the open. A long detonation delay could let it bounce, bury itself, or surrender the fragment pattern that made it useful. So the designers did not merely postpone the explosion. They changed the bomb's journey to the target. The weapon commonly called the 23-pound parafrag was the AN-M40. 23 pounds was its nominal class. A 1944 Army manual listed the loaded and fused bomb at 24.7 pounds. It was 29.5 inches long, 4.35 inches at its widest point, and carried 2.7 pounds of TNT. Its body was built around an inner steel tube with a tightly wound helix of square steel bar. When the explosive charge detonated, that construction was intended to produce many dangerous fragments instead of a few large, unpredictable pieces. The standard AN-M4 cluster packaged 3 AN-M40s together. When the cluster released, springs threw the bombs clear so their parachutes would not tangle with the adapter or with one another. Loose covers fell away. The parachutes opened. That opening did more than create drag. On the AN-M1 104 nose fuse, the parachute's deployment pulled the arming wire from the arming pin. A pyrotechnic delay then took about 2.5 seconds to arm the fuse. Once armed, the bomb detonated immediately on impact. This distinction matters. The fuse did not wait 2.5 seconds after impact. It waited before becoming armed. The parachute created the time and distance in which that safety process could occur. Contemporary guidance described the AN-M40 as a low-level weapon, with a minimum release altitude of about 75 feet and a maximum of roughly 400 feet with the fusing then in use. Too low, and the bomb might arrive before the arming sequence was complete. Too high, and the weapon surrendered the special tactical advantage for which it had been built. The parachute also helped suspend the bomb vertically. That made its final attitude more predictable and placed the fragmentation effect where planners wanted it, across the surface of the target area. This was not a bomb drifting gently to a landing. It was a narrow timing machine. The bomb alone was not the weapon system. The system was an aircraft, forward-firing guns, a rapid-release rack, the parachute bombs, fighter cover, intelligence, and a crew willing to fly inside the enemy's defensive envelope. The attack aircraft approached at minimum altitude. Its guns opened first, damaging exposed targets and suppressing anti-aircraft positions. As it crossed the field, the crew released the parafrags. The chutes opened behind the aircraft, while the pilot continued forward at full speed. Strafing and bombing became one movement. We know how important that was because 5th Air Force briefly experienced the alternative. When its supply of parafrags ran short, crews had to drop ordinary fin-stabilized fragmentation bombs from about 2,500 feet. At that height, the forward guns could not perform the same approach and suppress function. The aircraft had to return for a separate strafing pass. A second pass meant that surprise was gone. Gunners knew the direction of attack. Fighters had more time to intervene. Every additional run over the field created another chance to be hit. The parachute, therefore, bought more than distance from an explosion. It bought tactical compression. One approach, one burst of gunfire, one release, and one escape. The idea was older than the Pacific Campaign. George Kenney later recalled helping develop parachute fragmentation bombs during his years at the Air Corps Tactical School around 1929 or 1930. When he took command in the Southwest Pacific in 1942, he obtained roughly 3,000 surviving test weapons from storage and pushed them into combat. That origin story comes largely through Kenney's own later testimony, so it should be treated as a participant's account, not a complete institutional history. The first reported operational use in the Southwest Pacific came at Buna on September 12, 1942. Heavy and medium bombers attacked first. Then A-20s crossed the field at about 70 feet, firing their guns and releasing more than 300 parachute fragmentation bombs. The group commander claimed 17 Japanese aircraft destroyed on the ground. That was a wartime claim, not an independently verified count, but the attack convinced 5th Air Force that the combination was useful. Kenney requested 125,000 more bombs and ordered local efforts to adapt available fragmentation weapons. The parafrag was no longer a curiosity. It had become a way to attack enemy air power before it could leave the ground. By August 1943, the Japanese 4th Air Army had concentrated 10 flying regiments around Wewak, on the north coast of New Guinea. Those aircraft threatened the Allied plan to envelop and capture Lae. MacArthur's forces could not risk an airborne and amphibious operation, while a large Japanese air force remained within striking distance. Allied intelligence had read compromised Japanese air-ground codes and identified the concentration. Kenney also needed fighters close enough to cover the bombers, So engineers and transport crews built and supplied a secret forward field at Tsili. This is the part that disappears when Wewak is reduced to a story about one clever bomb. The strike depended on code breaking, reconnaissance, airfield construction, fuel hauled across New Guinea, escort fighters, heavy bombers, medium bombers, ground crews, and repeated missions. The parafrag was the sharp edge. It was not the entire blade. During the night of August 16 to 17, 50 heavy bombers took off for the Wewak complex. 48 reached the 4 airfields at But, Boram, Dagwa, and Wewak, dropping a mixture of demolition, incendiary, and fragmentation weapons. The next morning, 63 B-25s launched from Port Moresby and Dabadura. Only 32 reached the target. Weather turned back part of the force, and 10 aircraft could not release their auxiliary turret fuel tanks, a mandatory reason to abort. At about 9 in the morning, the B-25s attacked. At Dagwa, crews began runs from roughly 30 to 50 feet. At Boram, Colonel Donald Hall led aircraft over the field at about 100 feet. Forward-firing machine guns struck parked planes, vehicles, fuel, and defensive positions. Fragmentation bombs burst among aircraft that Japanese units had not adequately dispersed. The visual record is extraordinary. Bombers at treetop height, rows of aircraft below, and small white parachutes opening in their wake. But the film must be read carefully. Some surviving compilations combine different dates, fields, and attacks. Archive footage can show the method without proving every destruction claim attached to it. The raids continued on August 18, when 53 B-25s reached the complex after another heavy bomber attack. Weather paused the offensive on the 19th. Heavy and medium bombers returned on the 20th and 21st. This was not a single 15-minute event. It was a 5-day air offensive, in which the low-level formations formed one part of a coordinated campaign. The damage was severe. The simplest dramatic version says that more than 100 Japanese aircraft vanished in minutes. The records are less tidy. 5th Air Force crews submitted very high claims, but simultaneous attacks created a serious risk of counting the same damaged aircraft more than once. Parafrags could leave an aircraft recognizable but permanently unserviceable, inviting a later crew to attack and claim the same target again. A U.S. Army campaign history states that the August 17 attack left 100 parked aircraft destroyed or damaged, and that the next morning's strike wrecked 28 more. After the war, Japanese Major General Tanikawa said the 4th Air Army lost 100 planes in the first 2 days and called Wewak a decisive Allied victory. A broader official history estimated that the 5-day offensive destroyed about 250 Japanese aircraft on the ground, and in the air at a cost of 10 American aircraft. Those figures describe different periods and different categories. They should not be collapsed into one perfect total. What can be said with confidence is that 4th Air Army lost roughly 3/4 of its strength in the first 2 days, and could not effectively oppose the Allied operations at La Haye and Nadzeb 2 weeks later. The parafrag mattered because a small fragment did not have to vaporize an aircraft. It only had to puncture a tank, sever a control line, damage an engine, shred a tire, or start a fire. And those fragments did not distinguish aluminum skin from the mechanics and ground personnel working beside it. The human toll on the airfields was real, even though the surviving sources do not support a clean casualty total. The parachute solved one danger. Wewak showed how many remained. On August 18, Major Ralph Shelley led the 405th Bombardment Squadron toward Dagwa. Japanese fighters hit his B-25 while it was still 2 miles from the objective. The aircraft caught fire. Shelley had enough speed to climb and order a bailout, but leaving the formation without its leader could expose the following crews. He held the burning aircraft on course, completed the bombing and strafing run, then passed the lead to his wingman and crash-landed in the sea. Japanese forces captured him. He died on March 6, 1944, when the ship transporting him and other prisoners to Japan was bombed and sunk. Chelly's mission is the necessary limit on the title of this story. The little parachute could move an aircraft away from its own fragments. It could not remove enemy fighters, anti-aircraft guns, tropical weather, mountain passes, mechanical failure, or fire. It did not keep every pilot alive. It made one otherwise unacceptable risk manageable enough for the mission to be attempted. So why not just use a delayed fuse? Because a delay after impact and a delay before arming solved different problems. Against a ship, a 4 or 5 second detonation delay gave a heavy bomb time to skip, penetrate, or sink beside the hull while the aircraft escaped. Against parked aircraft and exposed equipment, the AN-M40 needed an immediate surface burst. Its parachute slowed and oriented the bomb before impact. The opening chute pulled the fuse arming wire, and the fuse waited before becoming live. Only then would impact trigger the explosion. That sequence gave the aircraft separation, without sacrificing the fragment pattern. At the tactical level, the parafrag allowed guns and bombs to be delivered in one low pass. At the operational level, it helped 5th Air Force attack air power at its most vulnerable point, on the ground. At the strategic level, it was an enabling tool, not a war-winning weapon by itself. Wewak succeeded because intelligence, forward bases, fuel, escorts, heavy bombardment, low-level attack, ordnance, maintenance, and human judgment worked together. The weapon, called a 23-pound bomb, actually weighed almost 25 pounds when loaded and fused. Its explosive charge was only 2.7 pounds of TNT. Its decisive feature was not size. It was timing. The parachute made the ground wait while the aircraft kept moving. And that is the point to remember. The chute did not make the bomb safer. It made minimum altitude attack possible by giving the pilot a head start against his own explosion.